Move this over here.
TELS.
All right. And you don't even have to ask, can you see my screen? It has a little thing now that says, people can see what you're doing. Now, the presentation software that I'm using is called Sway. And if you're not familiar with it, it's my favorite type of presentation software. It's cloud-based, and it's a shared document. And if we don't get through the whole thing during our time together, no worries. I'll share the link with you, and you can take a look at it at your leisure. So you don't need to take notes or anything like that. Everything like this will be available after our talk. It is it's basically arranged like a story. So you have your title, and then you go through it. If it's long, there's a little pancake over here on the right-hand side that has the table of contents to show you, and so you can skip to different parts of the presentation. So we'll be talking about tracks, what animals eat, where they live, and scat. And then there's also an example that I use just to kind of go through TELS with white-tailed deer. And then there's a review as well. For whom the bell tells. Again, we're focusing on 4 types of animal evidence, or evidence that animals leave behind. So we've got tracks, what animals eat, where animals live, and scat. So we'll follow these otter tracks, and we'll explore the first type of evidence in TELS, which is tracks. Tracks is really awesome, especially in the winter. Even with like a light dusting of snow, you can really see what the animals are up to. And animals are really actually quite difficult to observe. It's the moment you walk into a habitat, everything knows you're there. It's nothing quite walks like a human. So that's why I always recommend to people that are trying to observe wildlife is to bring something that slows you down. A camera is a really good one. It also helps you with recall, but a sketch pad or anything that gets you to vary your gait and not just tromp along like a human. But what's nice about either snow or mud is that you can see the tracks that they leave behind. The first time that I really got excited about tracks, I used to work for Neighborhood House, and my wife, Katrina, and I lived on a 90-acre nature center north of Oconomowoc. And we only saw like 3,000 kids a year, and it was private. So the only footprints really on that property, on that 90 acres, were animal prints. And they had a riparian woodland that was just, it was 10 acres, super gorgeous. And I would go down there. I'd spend a lot of time outside. I was taking a teacher naturalist course in River Edge at the same time. So I had a lot of time out on the property, and I would go down into this valley, and literally there would be like thousands of footprints. And it just kind of blows your mind, because of course you don't see these animals on a regular basis. And to know that they're there and to see that evidence is really just it really just lights a fire in your naturalist furnace. So it was really kind of telling, and that, wow, I can really get to know these animals and what they're doing. So it's also fitting that today, the first one that we're talking about is tracks. Here's some photos of some tracks that I found in the snow, some rabbit, deer, possum, some raccoon, and then some probably fox or coyote. There are 3 main types of movements for tracks: waddlers, hoppers, and walkers. Hoppers can be broken up into gallopers and bounders, but for most intents and purposes, these 3 are kind of like your main categories. I was saying it's kind of fitting that we're going through this today. My interview for the Urban Ecology Center was, Tim was in that interview, and they asked me to do a lesson plan, and Tim was supposed to be the naughty kid. And he was just being really squirrely and, like And I totally focused him saying, have you ever seen a raccoon walk? Have you ever seen a raccoon walk? Have you ever met a raccoon, Tim? And then all of a sudden he's like, what? Hey, oh, what? And then I had him walking around like a raccoon and doing the different animal walks. It was hysterical. But let's start with waddlers. And we've got a track pattern here on the screen. Wonder what animal would make these. So there's a couple of good things about tracks that you need to know. One is scale. So it's hard to tell exactly what this animal is because you don't know it's to scale. But there are some definite clues that will help you out and to tell you what type of animal, how they walk, where they go. So this one right here, you can see that it's grouped in pairs, 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 and it kind of makes an S pattern. That's very typical for a waddler. This particular animal has its own day in February. They say they can predict the weather. Any guesses? Any guesses? It's our friend the groundhog. Woodchuck, whistlepig. Groundhog is a waddler. Waddlers move their front and back legs at the same time. So 2 legs on the right side, 2 legs on the left side. Back and forth, and it makes their bottom waddle back and forth. So other animals that would be waddlers would be possum. And within those animal categories, you take a look at the individual prints. So this one right here, you can see that funky thumb on the possum. That's a giveaway. And then we've got our friend the beaver. Can't say beaver, you gotta say it with the teeth. Beavers with their webbed feet, they're also waddlers. And we've got our friend the raccoon. These are all a particular type of animal that walks with those left side at the same time, right side at the same time. We've got our friends, the waddlers. Now, I am not paying attention to chat, so if the other folks can let me know if you have any questions.
I just mentioned, Matt, that you were so good that day when I was supposed to be the naughty kid that I totally forgot that I was pretending to be a kid. Like you had me enraptured.
I will always remember that, having like Beth and you and Susan and everybody walking around the lobby like animals. Good times. So what you'll notice with some of these is, you know, this picture right here with the beaver and the possum and the raccoon. The picture it's an element from a Snow Stories banner that was produced by Dylan Shanahan. So I had a graphic artist work with me to kind of put these tracks together, and I'll show you that tracking banner at the end. It's just a good snowy scene that tells stories, because that's what TELS is. It's about telling stories and about animal behavior. So our first order of business, we got our waddlers. So put that in your back pocket. Next, we've got another type of movement. Now, these tracks come in groups of 4. So we got 4 tracks, space between 4 tracks. Again, it's hard to tell with scale, but this animal is about the size of a candy bar, maybe a Snickers. Its warning call is a chip, 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 and it's our friend the chipmunk. A chipmunk is what we call a hopper. Hoppers make a set of 4 tracks, then another set of 4 tracks with space in between. A lot of times their larger back paws are in front of their small paws. That's because they put their little paws down first, then bring their back feet out in front, and then they hop. Bounders and gallopers are a little different, but they're all kind of in that category of a hopper. Rabbits and gray squirrels are both hoppers. These are 2 really good tracks for kids and beginners, because it shows you a little bit of the difference between just 2 very common tracks. So there's other clues that you can use too, and I think that's what is important, is to just, you know, this is one clue in many that you can use to kind of interpret a landscape and to see what the animals are doing. But if you see a set of tracks like these 2 going up to a tree and then they stop, that's a good clue because rabbits can't climb trees. But I always say the rabbit tracks are in football formation, so two up front, couple in the back, or maybe like a Y. And then the squirrel tracks are more like a square. But these are two very common tracks, and it's a great way to introduce tracking to beginners. So again, we've got our track pattern leading us through the scene. We've got our friend, the wabbit, and the squirrel. So the third type of category are walkers, and walkers move their limbs diagonally. So front, left, back, right, then front, right, back, left. Sometimes their back track goes right into their front track and directly registers, so it makes it look like it's more of a line. So even though the animal has 4 limbs, you're only seeing 2 tracks. Some are direct registers and some are not. So deer and fox are a really good example of diagonal walkers, and you can tell which way the deer is going. It almost is like an arrow. And our friend the fox, again, you want to use more than just the track because they're not always pretty like this. Sometimes the snow melts, it makes it look bigger. Sometimes you can't quite tell all the little nuances because they're not in the best medium. But there's other clues that will help you out. So if you find a set of tracks like this in a landscape, there are some clues that'll help you out. One, if it's in a straight line, it's like it's going someplace. You're probably looking, because it's in the canine family, so you're looking at either a dog, a fox, a coyote, or a wolf. So you whittle away some of the things that don't make sense. Like we don't have wolves here in Milwaukee. And then, the size helps between a coyote and a fox. Also, the difference between a dog track, a domestic dog, and a fox and a coyote is that dog tracks tend to be more haphazard, unless they're with a human and they're on a leash. Dogs are, they're running over here, they're running over there, they put their snout in the snow, right? Whereas fox and coyote, they are not playing around. They are either traveling someplace or looking for food. So if you're seeing a straight line go through a landscape, you're probably looking at a wild animal. Or if you're seeing them all over the place, it's probably a dog. Or, of course, if you see a human track next to it, that's a giveaway. But those are the things that you're kind of gathering with the tracks. You're looking at the other evidence that you can use. So we've got our friend the deer, and we've got our friend the fox. Humans are diagonal walkers. So the next time you're walking around or on outside, take a look. When you take a step with your right leg, your left arm swings, and then the opposite, when you step with your left leg, your right arm swings. So that's kind of cool to notice that. Of course, we walk upright. So tracks are really a lot of fun, and they're just one of those things that are fun to explore, and they always have little tiny clues that give you a little bit of insight to an animal. So let's go over to the second type of evidence it tells, which is eat, or what animals eat. So it's important to realize that everything, as soon as you step outside, everything you see is food for something. And everything that grows outside has a purpose, place, and season. So really, if you follow the food, that's where you'll really find, and food has to do with everything. It's what they cache, it's what they follow, it's migration, it's hibernation, it's adaptation. It's a really important part of this story. So let's just consider, one animal. Let's consider the yellow-bellied sapsucker. So the yellow-bellied sapsucker is just a cool migratory bird that comes through Milwaukee in spring. And I guess when I was first learning about birds, oh my gosh, it just blows my mind. And the name is just hysterical. And when you talk about animal evidence, woodpeckers are a good one, right? And they're not, so it's what do they eat, right? Woodpeckers, holes in trees are an example of eat, right? So let's keep this moving here. So when you're considering a yellow-bellied sapsucker, you want to answer 3 questions, and that'll help narrow down the habitat and it'll increase your chances of seeing one. So first of all, what do they eat? And you can, phrase this for any animal or any insect or anything like that. So what level are they on the trophic pyramid, right? Are they decomposers, herbivores, carnivores, omnivores? So our friend, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, of course, likes to drink sap, but they also eat insects. I've heard they even dip insects in sap, almost like, French fries and ketchup. And it's important to realize, okay, like where is this animal looking for its food, right? What food does it eat? And then the next question is, when do they eat? And this has to do with what they do in the seasons. And here in Wisconsin, we're super lucky to have all 4 seasons. And then, so you're thinking about when do they, not necessarily, like time of day and things like that, but, are they here all year round? Do they hibernate? Do they migrate? So our friend, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, tends to move through here. So if you're looking to spot a yellow-bellied sapsucker, a really good place to hang out is a maple tree, right? So in spring, when that sap is running, you'll find our friends, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, going from maple tree to maple tree. And then, so where are the animals' food and water sources within a habitat? So you're taking your favorite natural space and you're locating, where do you have maple trees? Where are you seeing yellow-bellied sapsucker holes? So then you're doing observations, you're doing identifications, and then you're taking care of those spaces like the Urban Ecology Center, right? Conservation. So those 3 questions will really narrow down your choices for where you go to find an animal, because it's kind of all about like seeing that animal and holding your breath when you finally get to see it, and maybe taking a photo. So what do they eat? When do they eat? And where do they eat? So here's a good example of another animal in spring. So you might see this morning cloak butterfly in March, and it's just kind of mind-blowing, and then the more you observe and the more you learn, you just start to piece together this animal's life. And morning cloak butterflies are metal, man. They're so cool. So they actually hibernate underneath the bark of trees like a hackberry, and then those warm spring days, they come out and they survive those lean times before the spring ephemerals on maple sap and the sap of trees. So the yellow-bellied sapsucker holes are weeping, and then you hang out, and then all of a sudden you're seeing all sorts of animals visit these weeping sapsucker holes. So it's all interconnected, and the more you poke and the more you kind of investigate, the more you can, the more it kind of illuminates. So morning cloaks are awesome. You can guarantee if you go down the valley in Riverside Park in March, you'll see a morning cloak butterfly floating around. And I got this video specifically doing this. I'm going to go find a morning cloak butterfly. Sure enough, there it is. And then I think what's important when you're talking about TELS is that with tracks, it's really nice to have the winter, but really this is a full year, 4 seasons thing. If you identify the animal's food during the growing season, then you can start to see, you can kind of piece things together. And there's so much food outside. I mean, we've got all sorts of berries and seeds and nuts. I mean, these are all things that provide animals food all year round. So, and then you start to learn more. And then you can return to some of these cute videos that I've taken. I'm trying to take more videos of animals within their habitat. And then I know we've got quite a few birders in the group. And you know, the best birders always keep TELS evidence in mind, right? What is their habitat? What do they eat? Are they a gleaner or a ground forager, right? And what type of year, you know, what time of year are they present? So really in your mind, when you're looking for birds, you can almost predict what animals or what birds you'll see by piecing together those types of evidence. Really kind of a lot of naturalists do it intuitively, but when you're learning, it's good to frame it in that way. So, you know, really like noticing the life around you, observing behavior, gathering TELS evidence, and then a lot of times that will lead you to the third type of evidence, and that is where animals live. So we'll follow these bobcat tracks to our animal home right here. So where animals live. So of course we all live in neighborhoods, but within that is nature's neighborhood. And every field, forest, waterway, city block, there are communities of plants and animals. And within that community is where animals live. Sometimes they're hard to find, sometimes they're really, you know, obvious, and there's all sorts of different types. Some homes are temporary, like homes is kind of a loose term, but like this deer bed right here, you know, just kind of bunkering down for the night. And then some are just used to raise young, like a nest. You know, not all birds, like they don't live in their nest, they just kind of raise their young. And homes in general are a very elusive thing because we don't always see where animals live, but if you use TELS evidence, it'll lead you to their homes. And some homes are underground, right? You know, dens. Raccoons will live in a hollowed out tree, and they'll also live underground. So it just depends on what the habitat offers, what the ecosystem has. But you could always, in winter is a great time, and you don't really require snow. It's a great way to take note of what animal homes you find, and then going back throughout the year. Also with tracks, a lot of times the tracks will lead you right to an animal home. So that's a giveaway. And then of course we have the last type of animal evidence, the TELS. And it's always fun with kids, you know, talking about the type of evidence that animals leave behind. You don't get much more literal than scat. So, and I always say, remember it, scientists don't go, ew, they go, oh. And scat is just kind of a cool thing, and it's funny, you know. I tell kids, if you find Cocoa Puffs outside, don't eat them. That's rabbit scat. Or you got Raisinets, you know, of course we like to equate it to food. But it's not just fun and games. It tells you a lot about the animal. Of course, it's closely related to diet, so it ties in with the other eats. But, you know, like if you find a big steaming pile out on the trail, if it has hair in it, it's probably a coyote or a fox track, because those animals are eating other animals that they find outside, whereas dogs, they just eat dog food, right? But it tells you a lot of raccoon scat. You'll get to see lots of like black cherry seeds. So it gives you a clue, not only where they are and where they travel, but also what they're eating. And there are full field guides that go through that are on scat. So if you're interested, there's plenty to learn, and it's kind of interesting. So those are our 4 types, right? We've got our tracks, what animals eat, where they live, and scat. So let's just quickly and make sure we got to keep me on track here, because sometimes I can talk about this. Looking at the time, we're doing good. So let's look at our TELS example. for a white-tailed deer, right? So we've got our doe and our buck, and they actually have different tracks. You'll have the dew claws on the bucks, so you'll be able to tell that. There's also a difference in their scat. I can't remember. I remember Ding and Nikki, who were educators at the or at the neighborhood house. Yeah, I think it's doe, doe, or no, wait, buck, 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 doe. And I think there's a sprinkling of one and then a big pile. That's the difference. But there are different types. Of course, we have the tracks, but we have tracks, we have scat, we have the beds, we have browse, and then we have rubs. And then sometimes, if you're lucky, you can find a shed. So if you're in a natural space and you're looking to find a deer, to catch a good picture, or if you're a hunter, you're really studying the TELS evidence. So you're looking for tracks, you're looking for these highways. Something interesting about deer tracks is they're always one way. It's a one-way street. And that's because it's all about conserving energy, right? When it's cold in the winter, they're trying to conserve energy. So they want to wear down a path, and they don't want to pass each other on the trail. So you usually find one going one way and one going the other way. And then sometimes, if you're not lucky enough to find these in the winter, you can also see these tracks in the summer and in the growing seasons. And I call them ghost trails. So you might not see actual tracks, but you see where the vegetation is kind of trampled down. You can see deer trails and animal highways through the forest and through the fields if you lightly look, right? You're just looking for these subtle clues of animals and where they go. And then you'll find droppings all year round. It's not like they only poop in winter. And then in the growing season, you'll see them, use deer beds. So you'll see them in the grasses and things like that. And then you'll see lots of browse throughout the year. Deer love red ooze or dogwood, boy, that's like deer candy. And then in the fall and the winter months, you'll see the rubs. Here's a pretty cool video of a deer that I spotted at Schlitz Autobahn. And it was, I've never actually seen a deer making a rub. And then I noticed that it was not only rubbing it, so he's cleaning up his antlers. Looks like the velvet's already gone, so they're fully formed. So they're getting scent on there, kind of letting other deer know that that's his territory, and then kind of like broke off a little bit of bark and had a little nibble. So that's pretty cool. So for a deer, these are all the types of evidence. So if you're paying attention, slowing down, noting all of this evidence, the tracks, what it eats, where it lives, and its scat, you will really have a good opportunity to see a deer. And, when I was at the Neighborhood House Nature Center, like I said, I had quite a bit of time, and I was able to go out into the landscape and really study all of this evidence and then plant myself. So I actually sat on a deer trail that I noticed that I knew deer traveled on. And I kind of like hunkered down behind this tree, and the deer just walked right past me. I mean, I just literally could reach out and touch it. I also noticed like turkey, and I saw their tracks and I saw what they were doing. So I sat underneath this white oak stand, and sure enough, at dusk, they all came walking through, and then they flew up and they were roosting all around me. So animals, they know the moment that you walk into their habitat, they know that you're there. But if you do it right, they don't care. And if you wait, for what I've noticed, it's about 15, 20 minutes of being chill in their habitat. They'll eventually ignore you and go about their own business. So if you're really looking to observe animals in their natural, with their natural behavior, it's good to go someplace and just hunker down and be still and just relax. And you'd be amazed at what you can all see. And then we've got, so this TELS review, and this is the graphic that I use with kids. This is the one that I was saying that was produced by Dylan Shanahan. He was a graphic artist volunteer, and I used to play a memory game with the older kids that had the animal's photo and then their tracks, and then I would, you'd flip them upside down in a memory game, and then if you got the picture and the tracks in the same turn, then you got a match. And I wanted to do something for younger kids, because now that I was doing early childhood, I was looking for kind of a banner or like a sheet that I could use for track interpretation. And so we took those tracks and put them into this graphic. And this graphic is actually printed out on a 6x6-foot banner that lays on the floor. And I use puppets to kind of interact, but this particular photo has all of the TELS in it. So you might recognize some of the tracks. And I like how they're color coded, because that helps you kind of follow the pattern. So some of them you might recognize just from the presentation that we had today. But there are like the turkey tracks. We've got 1, 2, 3, and then a gap in between. So that's telling us that, oh, this animal can fly. Every time I point this out, kids think it's a dinosaur. You'd be amazed at how difficult tracking is for young kids. It's without prior knowledge, it's really difficult. But with using the TELS acronym, it really brings out a lot of those nuances, and kids can use it almost like a detective story. So we've got our single tracks, like our diagonal walkers, right? We've got our deer walking through, and we've got our fox walking through. And it looks like our fox was tracking our rabbit. And oh, I'm seeing a little bit of scat right here. And then it looks like our rabbit went into its warren. And then we've got our friend chipmunk that's kind of going through here, dips into its hole. And then we see an owl wing print. Too bad, owl, no lunch for you. And a little bit of pine cone that the chipmunk was nibbling on. And then we've got our friend beaver that walks around and cuts down the tree. And then we've got our mouse that burrows underneath the snow, comes out, burrows underneath the snow. We've got our chickadee that's got some nice little seeds on the ground. So this is a great graphic to help. So if you want, you can go back and download that photo. It's just a great little thing. It's a cool way to interpret that with kids, if you have grandkids or kids in your life. And it's also good for it. I also have a video that kind of goes through the interpretation of that track, of that tracking banner. So, and then last but not least, I have some resources that I've included here. One of my absolute favorite books is this American Wildlife and Plants, A Guide to Wildlife Food Habits. This just, when I found this book in like a used shop in Michigan, totally blew my mind. So it takes, mammals of the United States and birds, and it says, okay, white-tailed deer, what does it eat? And it lists all of their foods that they eat within a habitat. And then it cross-references, so if you're looking at, a particular plant, it references what animals eat that plant. So it just kind of blows me away, blew my mind. One of them was poison ivy. I guess I realized that poison ivy is a native plant. It's important. It's really terrible for people, but there was not a single animal or bird that didn't eat poison ivy berries. So it just kind of makes you think about the diet of animals and how important things are and how interconnected things are within a habitat. And then I learned a lot from Tom Brown's field guide. It really helped me just understand how to move through a landscape and kind of noticing those, those tiny clues. And then there's some other just resources that I found might be helpful. You might have your own. And then the Stokes guides are really kind of, I don't know, I after being in environmental education for 20 years, I think I like to go beyond ID. I'm more interested in the secret lives of animals. So these guides to animal tracking and behavior are really cool. And then these guides to bird behavior are it just makes you realize that it's just deeper than, and it's just kind of fascinating. So guides to bird behavior, it's just really interesting stuff. So, and again, remember this sway will be shared with you, and you can just kind of go through these different chapters and return back to places that you want to kind of revisit. All right, well, I'm gonna open things up here. There we go. I'm gonna stop sharing.